So, welcome to everybody who's joined today. Thanks for taking your time out of your busy schedule to be with us. I'm Aphrodite Brinsmead, Duro's Director of Product Marketing, and I'm excited to welcome some special guests onto our webinar today. So, it wouldn't really be a conversation in 2023 without talking about AI. And today we're going to touch on AI's use in component procurement. But this is more than just about AI. It's about making strategic decisions, making sure you don't miss product launch dates. And over the next 30 minutes, we'll be chatting about everything: procurement, supply chain, risk mitigation, and the role of data in decision-making. Here are today's speakers. Welcome to Phil and James. I will let Phil give a quick introduction and also tell you about who Cofactr is, just in case you don't know.
Yeah, Aphrodite, thank you so much for the introduction, and Duro for having us. We're big fans of Duro. We love everyone who works there and are thrilled to be a part of this. I'm here representing Cofactr. I am the co-founder and the chief strategy officer here at Cofactr. And our business model is basically everything electronic supply chain. That breaks into kind of three main categories. First, we have procurement automation. So we do a great deal of work on the data side of the electronic spot market to then take a bill of materials and a quantity necessary, and then convert that into a strategy and actual manifestation of procurement through like a buy button. So we'll actually get you the stuff where it needs to go and sort of take responsibility for making sure that your supply arrives. That, of course, is necessarily supported by actual physical logistics. So we do third-party logistics, that's outsourced operations for electrical engineering teams. That is a physical facility where we are doing anti-counterfeiting inspection, X-ray parts counting, actual kitting of those materials and shipping them out to manufacturing partners. And then through those two pillars, we provide an opportunity for a lot of business intelligence. So understanding the sourcing opportunities, the inventory, and the sort of management of actual parts, as well as all of the traceability on those parts, we can surface a lot of exciting opportunities to understand how you can optimize your overall supply chain, get products to market faster, see issues that might be coming down the pipeline in your manufacturing process. So that's sort of in a nutshell, the three things that we do.
Awesome. Thank you, Phil. And James, hopefully everybody on the webinar knows who Duro is. We're a cloud native PLM platform to help hardware engineers manage their product lifecycle and all of their product materials. And we have James, who is an expert in PLM, has been working in the industry many years, joining Phil on our discussion today.
Thanks, Aphrodite, and thanks, Phil. Yes, as Aphrodite said, we're a cloud PLM software company, and we're focused on hardware, so the needs of the hardware industry, and hardware devices are everywhere. And so today we're going to bring forward some of the insights that we have about issues of supply chain, and especially in the requirements through design and manufacturing of hardware devices, which is the kind of the footprint of Duro. Similar to Cofactr, we also have sourcing built in, and a lot of the value we bring is to surface supply chain information directly into the engineer's platform to help them with decision making. And I'd just say that, supply chain is a topic that's been around. It got a lot more visible during COVID, and many people thought, well, now COVID's over, supply chain issues are over. They aren't, and it's a very complex dynamic. So to the extent that Cofactr and Duro are addressing that, I think it's going to be helpful for any company that's in the design and manufacturing of hardware.
Absolutely, James. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen so we can have like a more engaged conversation. And I think kind of like, based on what you just said, obviously kind of COVID had big impact on supply chain. Let's start there. Like what's new? What should we be paying attention to in 2024? And what are engineering teams thinking about today? Phil, if you want to kick off.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I mean, well, what we saw pretty significantly with EE teams is during COVID, there was obviously a bit of a scramble to find those very, very difficult to find parts, dealing with brokers, anti-counterfeit inspections being a giant concern, and just the realities of a supply chain that had a bit of a nightmare scenario going on. Now, since then, things have normalized quite a bit. And I think that that's not only the market normalizing and sort of anticipating the supply needs, and obviously just ships getting across the ocean a lot more successfully, but engineering teams seem to have also pivoted that in their NPI process, they're designing really with much more of an eye towards procurability. And this has been a really significant jump where we're seeing bills of materials that are landing from our customers that just are more procurable on average. So before, when we might have seen 5 to 10 parts that were in some sort of limited supply chain environment, now we're just seeing maybe 1 or 2 or 3. Normally that's enough supply to get through a couple of batches of manufacturing, but in the longer term, we're still seeing some challenges where maybe anticipating the long-term supply of a part might have still been an issue, and still sort of rears its ugly head when you're looking at 12 to 18 months of sort of manufacturing cycles.
Yeah, and just sort of jumping into that theme, Philip, I think a lot of manufacturers think the supply chain issue is about just supply. And as you correctly characterized there, yes, it affects NPI, it affects, you get surprises, when's the last day to be able to order the part, should you forward buy, should you buy just in time. What we see in our customer base and generally in the industry, it's not just a shortage. It's especially in hardware, it's about all of the possibilities of where you can procure that component. And your usual contracted suppliers, where you've got a volume purchase agreement, you get surprises. You call them up, we just want another 10 of this or another 1,000 of that. And they say, sorry, somebody else just bought 18 months of our production. We don't know. So then it's a panic because that wasn't anticipated, it wasn't known. So that results in a supply chain issue, a supply chain shortage. But fundamentally, it's really about the complexity of the supply chain for hardware. And that industry, as we know, with Cofactr, is different to other industries that are sort of more heavy engineering centric, and use technologies of CAD and CAE and CAM and so on. And make heavy tooling to make the parts. They're more in control in that they're taking raw material and they're making injection molds, aluminum investment casting, forgings, and they are making the product, and they're sort of more in control, providing they can get raw materials. Whereas the hardware industry, the exciting and cool thing is you can have much shorter lead times going from product design to manufacture to shipment. But again, you didn't anticipate. Many companies can't anticipate what the changes may be when they come to actually make that purchase.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's a huge focus of sort of where we are. I mean, in those negotiated relationships and those distributors holding stock when something does sort of go awry, where do you turn to and what do you do? And I think that's maybe where we're starting to segue into how are we using AI or just better data to get ahead of these challenges. And that's really the focus of Cofactr. I mentioned sort of those 3 pain points of what we focus on, but underneath all of that, we're a data company, more so than anything else. And we have an incredible data team working nonstop to make sure that we take what is a pretty fragmented and relatively messy environment of data on, where are those parts, what parts are available, and then make sense out of it. And we do that very heavily with AI. And that really comes through 3 main categories, which is data extraction. And so this is not only data sheets and pulling from distributor websites through their APIs, but it's also the packing slips, the quotations, the notifications. So just getting sort of a centralized location of data, and then cleaning that data and collecting that data and putting it inside of a standardized schema, a unified schema, so that you can deduplicate the data, normalize the data, clean the data, and then get what isn't just a data source on where are parts available, how long will it take to get them, but it's a reliable and actionable data source. And that's really, I think, a big difference on what we're doing is where is the market actually today? Not conceptually, not in what's reported, but how long is it going to take me to get parts? How many parts are actually available? And that's That's not only sort of historically or a snapshot for right now, but we have some really exciting relationships that we're also leveraging with Nexar and Spectra to then look forward again with AI modeling on the future days of supply, so that you can leverage, I think, exactly those sorts of issues, James, that you mentioned, which is, well, I see that I have materials that have been earmarked for me, but if something happens, do we have enough parts on the open market of commercial off-the-shelf parts that we could get ahead of sort of things in either case? And that's the kind of sort of strategy and sort of higher form business intelligence that we're providing.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense because, you know, being in the PLM industry my whole career, it's oftentimes gets kind of a bad reputation because it's so complicated to use. The project never seems to get to the end. Users and executives aren't happy, but often that's because it's so complex, and by the time you're done, it's changed, and so you've got to it's a continuous process. So we see generative AI specifically as providing a real productivity boost to kind of address this complexity, because the database in PLM has a whole lot of rich information and understands the relationships of components to parts, to items, to documents, to process milestones and states. But the way to address that is hard-coded menus. Hence, 10, 20, 30, 40 years of customization. Most industrials are on their second, third, fourth PLM implementation and needing heavy customization to get it productive for them. So we see a huge future for generative AI with just helping to complement the access and putting together those relationships so that an entry in an LLM prompt could ask questions like, where can I get an equivalent Schneider capacitor of this part number and have it by this week? Or what is the model name or number of something that's available? It's within this price range and has this lead time. Because they've found out, like I said earlier, that their regular supplier, the OEM relationship to Schneider or to Cummins or to whomever, is completely wiped out of stock. And it's been a scramble to phone calls to wholesalers and distributors and even their own sister companies to look in their inventory to try and find it. So rather than, all of the phone calls, emails, human time, flights, trips, walking into silos, into inventory places with scanners to see if it's the right thing, we see a big future to help with unwrapping that complexity of PLM, getting to the data which is there and surfacing it, like that, instead of lots of customization. And that's very conducive to Duro's model, because we, the kind of opposite to this traditional model of customization, we, attempt to bring all of the necessary functionality natively into the out-of-the-box product, so people can just get productive much quicker.
Yeah, I think it's going to be an exciting year or two as we look forward into, like, all of our work in AI has been very deterministic. We're actively trying to just get it right. This is not, when you talk about hallucination or you talk about sort of subjective data, which obviously AI is so incredible at doing, right? Telling me a story, framing something in a fun or a professional way. And what we're very much so looking at is how can you get to that sort of useful, actionable, alternative recommendation or cross recommendation, exactly as you were mentioning. And I think that we're all kind of running in that direction of, okay, first we have to get the baseline of what is truth inside of the market. How do we understand parts completely? And then using AI to sort of filter through that and say, okay, well, how do I back my way into something? If I know the specifications of the part, how do I find that alternate component somewhere in the universe? And how does sort of AI play into that relationship to maybe pull out useful data from a data sheet and then highlight what the difference is between a part that is available on the market and maybe a part that is no longer available on the market. And I think that's kind of the trick. It's the most exciting thing, and it's also maybe the most challenging thing. How do you take an AI and really give it the mindset of an engineer and then have it collaborate with an engineer in real time to surface what might otherwise be very obfuscated information about alternative parts.
I'd love to touch on something you just said, Phil. You mentioned hallucinations, and I think anyone who's like tried Chat GPT or kind of like realizes like there's a lot of like inaccuracies and things that we can't really trust. I don't think we're quite there yet when we can fully trust AI with, you know, our procurement decisions. So how do we kind of, you know, what are some of the risks that we need to be thinking about, and like how can we kind of make sure that we're kind of bringing AI into this, you know, into the product development life cycle without causing too many issues like later on with like kind of quality and things like that?
Yeah, I can say that the way that we're managing it is any application of AI, right? So I was mentioning our relationship with Nexar Spectra and the sort of days of supply left, right? Which is like, we're here today, we're looking forward at the next 68 days. We believe there is enough supply for your demand for the next 68 days on the market before you would see an issue. Nexar and Spectra, right? They actively encourage, use this every day. Call this API every single day, because that 68 days, that's an estimate, right? That is AI making a guess at what it thinks the future will hold. And that's how we've been managing it today. And I think that anyone applying AI in sort of any deterministic environment, right, which is manufacturing, which is a bill of materials, is you might be able to sort of strategize based on AI. You might be able to cut a lot of corners with AI, but ultimately you still have to do that diligence. You still have to track the market. You still have to think actively, both as an engineer or as a procurement lead, in was what I was told by an AI model accurate, sort of consistently. You really can't take it for granted yet. And I think that we're probably a long way off.
Exactly, and AI still has a long way to go, and there's, you know, so I think where we are now and probably into 24 is the significant tenet of trust but verify, and that's one of the exciting things we found in working with Cofactr, that, you know, PLM industry is a software industry, and it enables engineering processes in companies. But the combination of Duro with Cofactr works, you know, we find it really exciting that you not only, you know, simulate in software and find things for the manufacturing, but you physically test the physical piece of hardware before it gets wrapped into a kit and shipped to the manufacturer. And that's ultimately what it is, because we know, because we're in this industry, there's been a lot of bad incidents. Not only fake parts that get into the supply chain and go into service and planes and cars and everything, but you know, physical hardware devices, circuit boards that have got, in your words, value-added hardware on them that isn't visually, you know, discernible. You can't, and it survives the automated test suite routines, but there's another device on there that wasn't known, and so that can facilitate cyber espionage and other activities that are extremely dangerous. Couple that with AI, you know, in the hands of bad rogue actors somewhere on the planet, is also a very dangerous thing. So the ultimate is, I think, that we can see for 2024 is, one, surfacing procurement and sourcing information directly up into engineering, and then following that life cycle down into manufacturing, into quality and testing, and into service. Number two is, which is helping engineers and manufacturing people make more better informed decisions. But then the other, along with that, is the trusted traceability. And that really does need to involve the actual testing of the physical hardware devices, because as we go about sourcing components, transistors and capacitors and circuit boards and graphics cards, and you find out that, you know, your usual supplier is supplying you fine, and their supplier is supplying, but stage 3, there may have been some swap because they were out of stock. So we found a new one which has got the identical part that visually looks the same part, but it isn't. It's been manufactured to resemble the authentic Intel processor or AMD drive or something. And that's not visible to tier 2 or the OEM that you're buying from, and you can trust it contractually, visually trust it, but there's there's the absolute need to do very intensive, testing of that piece of hardware.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I cannot, insist heavily enough that no matter what we're doing on the data side, even as materials come through our facility, I mean, that first article inspection, when you get a chip and you don't know 100% of the traceability, doing the decap, actually sort of testing holistically, sending it to the lab as appropriate to make sure that there's nothing questionable inside of your supply chain. Because and I would say practically our customers, we're knocking out a lot of the easy stuff, right? We're knocking out the 98% of the bill of materials that was just going to be a giant time suck for you, figuring out what's the best strategy to get the parts cheapest where they need to land on time, right? Our physical facility, we have anti-counterfeit processes. We do X-ray and optical microscopic inspection. We'll, check for markings on the actual chip, solderability. But the process of sending it to a lab to get it decapped to really understand, are these parts legitimate? It's always going to be a critical process. And then once you get that first article off the line, making sure that you do that inspection on the first article to make sure everything is operating correctly. Because, I mean, we've had customers that no matter how much you've sort of followed the supply chain and how obsessive you've been about traceability, I mean, we had a customer that had a challenge where they received a manufactured or a sort of assembled board, and they saw on the board at the first article inspection that one of their components was not quite acting as it was anticipated to act. And when they looked at it closely, they saw that the screen printing, the markings on the actual component were inaccurate, right? And this is independent of the procurement. This is independent of the kitting. This is independent of even the reliability of the manufacturer. There was just some sort of issue that had popped up. And in that case, the traceability became about tracking it back and creating an auditable structure to figure out what had gone awry. And in this case, it was just that an automotive component had been sort of swapped, relatively understandably, but at the manufacturer, the same component manufacturer, very, very similar MPN, but different markings and ultimately a different chip because of the automotive grade. And having the traceability, even at that sort of what is ultimately a human error, a physical human error, the traceability allowed them to very quickly, using Cofactr, sort of get back through the shipping schedules, the received materials, the inspection of those materials, where we sort of pulled it together and we said, okay, good news. It's not a counterfeit part. Like inside of this ecosystem, it's not something that we have to panic about. It was a relatively simple mistake. But the traceability at any step, right? Sort of whether you're doing those really high level inspections and lab tests, whether you're just keeping traceability documentation on hand so you can understand where errors do happen, right. It's critical.
Another part of that is auditability. So auditing the entire life cycle of that product and its processes.
Absolutely.
And I think, so we've been talking about software, I've been talking about trusted traceability and inspecting the physical part, but what about the organization? Because we're kind of software companies and you've got the distinction of also inspecting physical hardware. But if you think about some of the people on some of the names and companies on this webinar attending it, they live in quite mature organizations. One of the coolest things for me in joining Duro is that our customers are mostly young companies growing fast. They've only known cloud software, and they don't have time and they don't have the history to have their rigid kind of paradigms and the over the wall to the next department. I'm done. I'm moving on to the next engineering project and so on. Because what I've seen in my career is this over the wall mentality still exists even with the advent of very modern, cohesive, engineering through lifecycle platforms. It doesn't overcome the organization because those people are measured on things and they have this charged number to work on this project. That's closed. They move on to the next one. It's moved over and over and over and eventually gets to sourcing, who find there's a problem with that's which engine is specified is not available, or they've got 10 other brands and they want to consolidate into a volume of fewer brands or sizes or specifications. So what are you seeing? Because, I think it's, again, generally in mature manufacturers, they have to somehow dissolve those barriers to the extent they can to take full advantage of, software like ours. Our customers generally are much newer, growing fast, and highly matrixed organizations. So we're not seeing those barriers to the same extent. But what are you seeing in your customer base?
Thinking about the more mature organizations, and this is where I think on our front, where the business intelligence comes in and can get kind of exciting, right? Because you might have mature products, bills of material that have been manufactured for years and will be manufactured for years. You've got NPI bombs that are in process that are being cut regularly as those products are being sort of released to production. Those are both drawing from parts libraries. Those inventories might be scattered to the winds between contract manufacturers, EMS providers, in-house inventory at a third-party logistics provider like Cofactr. And then you have the entire world of supply chain risk. You have sort of everything else that can be thrown into it. And those are some diverse data types, right? And this is where I think a tool like ours can really shine, because we kind of allow you to surface that business intelligence, something that we're very, very excited about. And this is probably the most boring and exciting use of AI that we're going to be rolling out is just human writable SQL querying. So looking across, here's 8 different sort of databases and the parts market and all the bills of material, and sort of it's all just sitting in what feels like still just piles of spreadsheets. And now, how do you get to useful information inside of that? And for leadership inside of a mature organization, they might be thinking about the overall health of the library of parts and thinking about the sourceability of those. And you might say, well, I want to think about the sourceability ratio. So how often in the period of a year are parts available on the market? So 0.9, 9/10 of the year it's available. 0.3, we're in some trouble, right? If we hit a pinch, we're going to be in a bad place. And using Cofactr to query against your inventory, against your held inventory by manufacturers and distributors, and leveraging the parts sort of database that we've provided, and say, okay, what are internal part numbers that have less than 50% of those parts at a procurability that is lower than 0.9, so that I can holistically just sort of surface the IPNs that might be in a troublesome situation as I'm looking forward? Or what are parts that are being sort of held in any inventory against the sort of spot market, where if I look across the next 18 months of manufacturing, where could problems fall in, right? So do I have days of supply, or do I have overall trends in the supply that suggest that there's actually not enough on the shelves right now? And that by the time we get through those manufacturing cycles, will we be able to find those parts on the market? And this is the stuff where I think it gets really, really buzzy, because pulling in all that data to a centralized position and then surfacing those insights, that's the really mind-blowing stuff. That's the stuff where I think you can really, really get excitement, let alone all the financial opportunities of looking across parts categories, understanding consolidation inside of manufacturers. I mean, this is the stuff where I think you go, well, why would a mature organization be interested in something that is fundamentally doing procurement when I have a procurement function, is doing inventory when I have an inventory function? You go, well, because all that data still needs to go somewhere, and what you can do with it is really mind-blowing.
That's awesome. In the interest of time, I would love to, I think a lot of what we've talked about has been some future-looking stuff. I'd love to hear from each of you, just one point and one recommendation of what companies can do right now. And James, you can start.
Yeah, it's about that organizational connection between engineering up here and sourcing and procurement down here. There are software suites and platforms like Cofactr and Duro that can unite that and present that sourcing information directly up into the engineering during the design phase. So I'd encourage I guess it's more the more mature companies and manufacturers in this audience and in the industry to consider how organizationally those people can collaborate, given that there are technologies to allow them to collaborate, and knowing that will eliminate or minimize to eliminate the downstream churn, the friction, the panic late stage changes, or the inefficiencies in procurement, because procurement have got a big budget. If you can save 1% on their expense, and that flows into the life cycle of maintainability, maintenance, future products based on the old current product, then it's a massive, massive saving. So it's really to think about the organizational structure, reporting lines, span of control, what exists today, and rework loops, how they could be eliminated, what the root cause of that rework is, and those failures and inefficiencies. And, again, the software is in advance of the organizations is the point. So try to figure out that organizational structure that can take advantage of these platforms now.
Yeah, and I guess I would add, because obviously sort of collaboration is key, and that sort of over the wall very, very rarely turns out positively these days, whether that's internally or with an external partner. I would sort of highlight that supply chain sort of data in its totality, logistics data, these are all super, super interesting things to look at on paper. You can make spreadsheets on spreadsheets on spreadsheets that give you lots and lots of numbers, but the trick is sort of how do you put an analytics layer on top of that surfaces those concerns. And I think when you look at mature organizations, really sort of scaled, sort of international industrials, the work that they're diligently sort of submitting man hours to is making sure that they are not just looking at sort of a data repository or a data lake, but they're or not a data lake, but a data repository and functional data where you can use analytics tools to pull out what's useful. And I think whether or not you're doing that with internal tooling, or if you're doing it with a software solution like Duro or like Cofactr, understanding all of these sort of data points on supply chain, on manufacturing, on logistics sort of processes. That's I think what we could all be doing a little bit better, sort of every organization could be doing a little bit better, is just how do you surface those things? And so giving adequate resourcing or adequate tooling to really have that sort of analytics process.
Yeah, and I want to extract out of what you just said and amplify it that it's the data sources, because AI is only as good as the reliable data that you feed it. And one of our customers oversubscribes during the manufacture of their products by millions of dollars just to have the inventory on hand. So what we're contemplating there is creating a data lake for them, which comprises all the sources possible, from the OEMs to the wholesalers, the distributors, the online catalogs, and their own inventory in their different sites and locations around the country and around the world.
Great. Yeah, really good answers. So software and people is the answer.
Exactly. Collaboration, but people need the software to make these informed decisions is the key point, but we don't want to bump against these organizational barriers because I report up here and I've finished my job and I've signed off and I've gone and now I'm on to the next one. So
awesome. And I know we're nearly out of time, but just wanted to get one of the questions that came in, one or two of the questions that came in answered. So Phil, a question for you. How much of the availability, lead time, and pricing information that you're using is accurate? How much manual invoicing, phone calling happens behind the scenes to actually get the parts procured? I think it's an interesting.
Yeah, that's a very excellent question. So the availability, the lead time, and the pricing information. So as far as availability goes, we do a huge amount of work deduping data, normalizing the data, and cleaning that data. It's if you look at a part search engine, for example, what they are is they are a wonderful place to see what distributors are listing as their supply. That is entirely different than where you can buy them. Can you actually buy them? Is that a reliable source from which to buy? And we are sort of doing the actual procurement. So not only do we have a huge sort of data force that is pushing to say, it's like 3M versus the number of other ways that you can describe the company 3M, or nom-de-plumes of 3M that exist in the world, right? Like getting that down to a really unified understanding of a part, a manufacturer, a distributor. That's a huge part of what we're doing. The lead time, reported lead time versus real lead time, our lead times are very, very accurate. So we are actually tracking the lead time of orders, that's both that are being drop shipped to manufacturers or OEMs, and the materials that are coming through our facility. Our lead times look a little bit different than what distributor lead times look like, and that is just fact of the matter what's actually being seen in the world after we're doing procurement. And the pricing information is very, very accurate. We are not taking for granted a single data source. We're checking APIs directly with distributors to make sure that their minimum order quantities and those price breaks are represented accurately. If you have negotiated pricing, that is imported directly into Cofactr so that we're seeing your actual negotiated pricing, not just what's listed through various data sources. And then as far as how much manual phone call sort of processes, for every distributor that we can do API buying from, we are. For sort of a number, if we're sending out an RFQ that's being generated and shipped or sort of sent to that distributor or that source in an automated format, when we receive back quotes, when we receive or sort of ship out the PO, get back that confirmation, these are parsed through AI. This is a huge use of AI. It's just making sure that, to your point, the availability, the lead time, the pricing, and then that communication is all accurate and sort of managed in automated ways. That being said, there are distributors that it makes sense to get on the phone, and we do when we need to. I mean, the reality is that we are in manufacturing. We're not just a software company. We are part of the actual pipeline, getting your products to market. And we are not shy about getting on the phone. We're not shy about sending those emails. And when it is necessary, it's absolutely necessary, because it's completely unacceptable if an automated process means, or the necessity of an automated process equates to a product not getting manufactured. So I would say an easy 90 to 95% is entirely automated. And then we have a great team working in our logistics department that supports that.
Awesome.
Great.
Well, thank you so much, James and Phil. I think we'll have a lot more news on this probably like in the coming year, in the coming months, especially from Cofactr, around what you're going to be coming out with, and the same with Duro. I'm sure we'll have some exciting announcements next year too. And please, when we close the webinar, please take a minute or two to answer our feedback survey. We'd love to get some information on how to improve. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.